This is Dan Dix here, reporting for Press for Truth. Today is Monday, May the 28th, 2018, and the Canadian economy is pretty much tanking, ladies and gentlemen. It is not looking good whatsoever, despite what you may be hearing from most mainstream media pundits saying, have no fear, everything is fine. No, they are either lying to you or very, very uneducated about what's actually going on. Some people are starting to realize what's actually coming down the road. This is an article just out from the Financial Post. A third of Canadian business directors expect our economy to get worse. Political squabbles, rising interest rates, and uncertainty surrounding NAFTA talks are dampening Canada's business outlook. And joining us on the line today to help break all of this down is our good friend Josh Sigurdson of World Alternative Media. Josh, thanks for taking the time to speak with us today. I've noticed that on your channel lately, you've been covering a lot of economic news. You talk about the derivatives market. You talk about, these various bubbles all around the world that are popping or inflating so big that they're about to pop. And, one thing that's why I wanted to have you on to focus today in particular on the Canadian economy. How bad are things really getting here in Canada? Because, we're being led to believe, numbers in 2017 were good. I think the GDP was up 4% or something like that. But as these American business leaders are forecasting, it's not looking very good for 2018. What would you say the current state is of the economy here in Canada, and is there cause for concern?
There is a lot of cause for concern, Dan. Now, I would just go back to a while back ago, I went online and I saw a few articles that really popped up for me, which was that the Bank for International Settlements, which I'm a fan of, obviously, but they got to the point where they are warning that Canada is one of three economies in the world most at risk of a banking crisis. This is among Hong Kong and the Chinese government in total. So that's a huge concern. And then on the same day, we found out that household debt in Canada is at $1.8 trillion. That is unbelievably catastrophic. You mentioned, the GDP is up and all that. The Liberal government is really good at veiling statistics in their favor. A great example is the unemployment rate, where they basically say that people aren't unemployed anymore after a few months. And what you really need to be looking at is a labor force participation rate, which shows that we are at a time where we've never seen such a bad outlook for employment. Now, I always mention the fundamentals are off the table with the economy and the markets due to the level of manipulation and centralization. So you can't put a date on when the crash is going to happen. It's simply impossible. However, we are seeing every telltale sign we could possibly see as of recently that we are well on the way to a massive bubble burst in the stock market. The TSX does not look good. A massive burst in the fiat bubble, which always reverts to zero, going back to 1024 AD in China. We will see a crash. Now, with that said, I always talk about independence and individualism. So I think it's really important that people do their own due diligence. I'm not giving market advice. I'm not giving investment advice. However, I think it's incredibly important that people prepare for this by reading into that which is the most boring, the monetary system. It sounds so boring. If you can't control your own money, that money will control you. And then you become a subservient slave of the banking system and the government. Populace in debt is a populace in servitude. And if they shove you down a bottomless pit of debt, you are forced to ask for a ladder up from the government and the banking system exactly where they want you. So, no, it is not looking good. We are seeing the inevitable end of all socialized empires. And we are seeing something that even Venezuela has more gold than Canada. I confronted the Minister of Finance, Bill Morneau, a few years ago on this, who said basically that gold didn't really have any value. They sold off all of their gold except for a little bit for show. Venezuela has more gold, and Venezuela is going into it has been in hyperinflation for a long time now. So imagine what happens when fiat crashes in Canada. where will Canada go? We have nothing to back us up. All we can hope for is the international community, and we know what that means. That means, palling around with the global establishment, the global banking establishment, the IMF, getting loans. And if we get a whole bunch of loans from the IMF, we are in debt to the IMF, and it's the last thing Canadians want. And on top of all of this, Dan, we are taxed to death in Canada. I believe it was before the carbon tax came in that we had measured about 65% taxed most individuals in Canada. Now that is everything from income tax, GST, PST, in some places MST. That's property taxes, business taxes, capital gains taxes, eco taxes, fuel taxes, and the list goes on, business taxes. And now we have a carbon tax, which is a tax on everything. And then the most important of all, the extortion of the masses through the hidden tax of inflation.
Well, what other sort of manipulative techniques do you see them using in the foreseeable future? Because I know, when the crash happened in 2008, Canadians were led to believe that things were not bad here and that the banks didn't receive any kind of bailouts. But what ended up coming out, we found out the truth of the matter was no, that things were just as bad here as they were elsewhere. And so right now, are there plans to move into these kind of negative interest rate zones? And is it possible that we could see something as bad as what we saw in Cyprus, where they literally took the money from people's bank accounts in order to bail out the banks? Is it that bad, or is this just am I overdoing it here?
I think you're underdoing it. I would completely agree. We have bail-in laws, bail-in regimes in the budget in Canada. We were, I think, the first country in the world to actually put it in the budget. And that was under, I believe, actually Stephen Harper, as a matter of fact. But they will use these bail-in regime laws. And that basically allows them to cash out bank accounts. We look at the ECB in Europe. Mario Draghi was talking about getting rid of depositors' insurance, which would mean if they bail in the bank, which means, first of all, if your money's in the bank, it's not yours, it's a bank's. And in that specific case, they can take your money out of your bank account, and they insure at this point, I believe, at the maximum 3.5%. So yeah, that's real good. That's real insured. You get all your money stolen from you to bail out a bank that isn't into savings and loans. This is like an investment bank. They're investing in terrible assets around the world, and they take that risk upon themselves. They lose your money, and then you get 3.5% back if you're lucky. The banks in Canada and the United States and elsewhere in the world never recovered from 2008. They are all insolvent. If you look at the cash to deposit ratio for the banks around the world, some are as good as, 20% of cash is covered. Most, especially credit unions, are looking at, in some cases, as little as 0.15% of cash is actually covered, or they actually have in cash. So basically, that means that these banks are bankrupt. They don't have any money. All their money is invested. All their money is speculated on. None of it is actually in their hands. I know a guy who tried to take $100,000 out of his credit union, and they told him, well, we'll have to slowly take it out over a year because we don't have that cash. Now imagine what happens when there's a bank run and 5 people get their money out, because it's ridiculous. So you mentioned negative interest rates. I do believe this is a huge issue that's coming up in the near future. We've seen in the States as they try as hard as they can to bring interest rates up, and it's really hurting the economy right now. They're trying as hard as they can to manipulate into prosperity temporarily, when in long term it means absolute havoc in the economy. And really, they're trying to stay out of negative interest rate territory, but it's futile. They went down a stunning amount in the 2008 recession, and they will have to go down far more to stay to stop the economy from crashing. So what they're doing is they're trying to unroll the centrally planned global cashless system, which we're seeing in China, India with the Aadhaar system, Australia, where they're demonetizing a lot of amounts of money for tax evasion purposes and money laundering and all that nonsense. And then at the same time, Sweden, I believe it's about 1% of their money is actually in cash. Almost no one takes cash. It is a serious issue, and if we are in a cashless system that's centralized, think about it this way. If, like I mentioned before, if your money's in the bank, it's not yours in the banks. Well, if your money's always going through the banks via digital transaction, legal tender laws, it's never in your hands. You are essentially enslaved to the banking system. That paycheck goes right to the bank, and that bank carries your money always. You never have it in cash. Think of how dangerous that is. That means no runs on the banks. That means they can bail in the banks and have nothing, no blowback, because no one can do a bank run. And then they take away the remaining depositor insurance and you get nothing back. It is a serious problem, and it's one of the most crucial steps towards that global new world order that you and I have been talking about for so long, Dan.
Have you noticed recently it's almost like a trend where cash just seems to be non-existent? I mean, I often find from different merchants, cashiers, restaurants, whoever you go to, they're often surprised when I try to pay in cash. They've always got the debit machine or the credit card machine in their hand, ready to hand it over. And when I hand over cash, sometimes they're taking it back. And you're like, oh, that's weird. We don't really see that much. I even had one lady at a restaurant have to go into the back somewhere, and it took her like 10 minutes to locate a till. They're not using it. They're not using cash. Have you noticed this trend picking up in the last few years?
Absolutely. In a place like Saskatchewan, for example, Saskatchewan, statistically about 12% of people actually go to banks in person. The rest do all their banking online. And a lot of them, they never see that money. They never hold that money. It's always going through the banks. And this is a major issue because, yeah, they are programming people to put out their hand to, tap their card on. And, I've used it. It's convenient. But all bad things from the government and the banking system always come under the thin veil of quote unquote convenience. And that's a huge issue. So I believe at some point in the near future, we will be having chips put in our hands. And a lot of people say that I'm crazy for saying that, but they're already doing that in places like Sweden for public transportation. So it's not that far off that this will happen eventually in Canada. Canada is worse than the U.S. when it comes to the cashless system. And the U.S. M0 shows a downward trend where they are slowly phasing out cash. Australia has they've stopped $10,000 Australian dollar transactions in cash. Now, a lot of people will be like, oh, well, that's $10,000. Who transacts in $10,000? Who cares? It's a slow incremental frog boil. And that is really what it's coming down to. So I've noticed that this has become a huge issue in Canada where a lot of people don't carry cash. I've noticed a few restaurants that have only taken cash, and a lot of people say it's inconvenient, and I salute them for really standing up against this. They're usually restaurants owned by older people that don't really want to fall into this new technocratic age. There's a difference between what we're seeing with the cashless system and then something like Bitcoin, for example, where, if your money's in the bank, it's not yours to the bank, and, always going through digital transactions, it's never yours. Bitcoin, it's always yours. It's not going through a banking institution that centralizes things and holds it and tells you when you can or cannot use your money. Look at China. They have sesame credit or social credit, where people are judged on, are they criticizing the government? Then they'll get a bad social credit, bad guy trying to support freedom because the government, knows what's best for you and you must be subservient to us or else. So they lower their, social credit score, like a credit card score. And then they are banned from using their money in a lot of cases. They can't feed their family. And if people don't think that this is coming to Canada anytime soon, look at Trudeau's comments during the election about China's basic dictatorship and how it works. This isn't, rocket science. It's not conspiracy theory. It is a known fact that this is happening. The IMF have been talking about it for years. They talk about it at Davos. People like Kenneth Rogoff writes about it, and Ben Bernanke just loves his ideas enough to write a foreword to his book. This is happening fast, and if we don't catch on soon and get into the boring subject of money, we will be taken as an apathetic sheep on a farm, eating the grass, saying everything's okay because I have grass to eat. I don't care about the cage around me. And then you walk off to the slaughter with a smile on your face, and then there's nothing more that can be done. people have to act fast before centralization takes over their life and throws them into absolute debt servitude, because it will happen.
Yeah, and we need to stay two steps ahead, and especially before anything like a run on the bank happens, and that can happen overnight. It could happen within the blink of an eye. So, what are some of the ways Canadians should be protecting themselves? I mean, if the banks and the governments are not holding gold, maybe that's a good sign that we ought to be. Is that the answer? Physically getting the cash in your hands, getting some gold and silver, and maybe looking to decentralize cryptos? What would you say are some of the proactive solutions Canadians can take in preparation for this coming crash?
Well, I think a big sign of what we should do is, while the central banks are getting rid of the gold, the bankers are piling up on gold. The bankers are piling up on silver and Bitcoin and other cryptocurrencies. Now, people who are unaware of cryptocurrencies will see it as ironic for me to talk about how terrible the cashless society is and then go on to promote Bitcoin. But of course, the blockchain, if centralized, can be used to overthrow, or it can be used to enslave humanity. The blockchain, if decentralized, can be used to overthrow that which enslaves humanity. Gold and silver are based on scarcity, application, demand. That's what brings it value. Gold is very rare, and it's created when supernovas happen. So just consider that for a moment. Bitcoin, 21 million coins by the year 2140. It has scarcity, demand, and application, and the fees aren't as bad as some people say. There are issues, and the free market will figure that out and adapt. And if something better comes along, so be it. Good for them. But with that said, I think it's super important that people pile up gold and silver. This is my opinion, not investment advice, and cryptocurrencies that have sound fundamental value. About 95% of cryptocurrencies are terrible. So do your own due diligence. I think the number one thing people can do is inform themselves, educate themselves, be ready to be uncomfortable and look into that which makes them uncomfortable and that which makes them afraid. Because with fear comes action, with fear comes education, with fear comes actual change. And that change comes from you as an individual, not from the government or the banking system, which takes advantage of you, and they are dependent on your dependence. So be aware of that. I think it's important that people look towards other things like food, water, self-defense. They're not gathering things for the toughest guy on the block, and like I mentioned, gold, silver, cryptocurrency. So it really comes down to self-sustainability, financial responsibility. For freedom's main value is responsibility. You cannot have freedom without individual responsibility. You as an individual are free. You as an individual can stand for yourself. You as an individual don't have to bow down to these satanic bankers and elites that do everything in their power to have you under their control and have you apathetic, ready for the slaughter, like I said, with a smile on your face. So people, do your own due diligence. Don't listen to just me. Don't listen to just Dan. Read, look into things and understand them, for with information comes change, and that change comes from you as an individual, as a free human being.
Yeah, solid, sound advice. Diversify your portfolio, folks. Get into the gold and silver space. Get into the crypto space. Don't put all your eggs in one basket, and certainly become self-sustainable when it comes to not depending on the government for anything or the banks for anything, right down to the very food that you eat. So, on that note, Josh, great words of advice. Give people the links so that they can follow your work, because I know you're going to be covering this more as it continues, and as we're going to inevitably see the Canadian economy start to go into even more troubling times. You and your co-host John Sigurdson are going to be all over it, I'm sure. So how can people find you if they want to stay up to date with the crashing Canadian economy?
Absolutely. They can check out World Alternative Media, and we cover as many stories from around the world on different economies around the world and everything we possibly can, with the basic fundamental of freedom in mind. So World Alternative Media on YouTube, myself and our author and economic analyst at WAM, John Sigurdson, cover these issues on a daily basis, all day, every day. It's exhausting way to live, but it's a very important thing to do, to provide information to people as you're doing, Dan. Of course, you can find us on Steemit at Josh Sigurdson. Find me on Twitter at World Alt Media, and on Facebook you can find me Josh F. Sigurdson and World Alternative Media. You just stay tuned. We're always working to get as much information to you as possible that the mainstream media will not give you, refuses to give you, because of course they're all bought out little cowards working for the big farm plantation that we know as a government, world government, and central banking system.
Yeah, well, we can see it coming, and we've been warning about this for years, and we're very glad to have yourself and John and channels like yours raising awareness about what people not only need to be on the lookout for, but also how they can more importantly protect themselves moving forward. Yeah. So links will be located in the description below. Everyone be sure to check them out. Josh, once again, thanks for joining us today.
Thank you.